Hello, gang. Welcome to China. That is where I live. It is my home now. China. Somewhere in Asia. It's a pretty big country. Many people. China. My home. Should I be living here? Who knows? I only know that I am here. I hope everyone is well wherever and whenever you are. JD is back. Episode 7. I know I'm going to run out of fingers eventually, but whatevs. In today's episode, I answer the question, why China? Well, the short answer, after having lived here for 5 years, is that my coming here was a kind of happy accident. It is more like China chose me. But I believe this warrants a deeper explanation. Well, my interests in China started in 2011, but I'm going to look further back to 2007. In that year, my older brother moved to England, and I had caught the travel bug. So I readied my passport. Also, that year, the financial crisis began. This was significant since I was working in a financial industry, debt management, and that was the sector worst hit by the crisis. There was already speculation back then that my company would not survive. So I had already begun looking for alternative employment. But in a country facing economic downturn, this was harder than it seemed. In 2008, I received my last and smallest raise with the company, a mere 50 cents. Actually, 2008 was my most productive year, but I will save that for another video. I took my first overseas trip that year. I also began to look for various kinds of employment, ramping up my search beyond New York. First, I employed a service, Resume Rabbit, to disseminate my resume across a broad spectrum of employment-related websites and hoped that something would bite. After that, I caught wind of a sales presentation in my area and figured I would attend. I had nothing to lose. All attendees received a free computer, which was fairly impressive, considering there were something like 100 attendees. The presentation was not all that impressive, and while the conference was free, they wanted a subscription for those interested in more information, which I wasn't about to provide. However, I did get the free computer as promised. Not surprisingly, it was a Chinese, no-name knockoff brand running what amounted to a smartphone operating system. In other words, a cheap nothing that the company would not lose money giving away. But it came with a certain piece of software that interested me. QQ. I was eager to find more information, and learned that it was some kind of social media. I should point out that I invested heavily in social media that year, joining every platform I could. So I gave it a try. Not long after, I started getting QQ invites from people in China, mostly in Chinese. I will refer to those of whom I first got the invites as the original five. They were the ones I maintained the longest correspondence. However, at that time, my interest in China was scant at best. Actually, a year later, I would start getting involved in Korean culture through Asian contacts on social media. My interest in Japan was waning at that time as well. In 2009, 2010, I maintained correspondence with people in China, but at the same time, my finances were beginning to suffer. I started to develop an interest in Korean music, which I will talk more about in a future video. I was still not altogether interested in China, or even considering visiting China. I did not rule out the possible overseas work as finding a job in America was becoming impossible. In 2011, my company went under, and I was forced into unemployment for 9 months. Eventually, I went to a temporary agency and found similar work, first in a boot company, then with a blanket and towel company. I will note that I was not all that crazy about data entry work, but I was exceedingly good at typing, so I accepted. At least with my prior company, I felt I was doing some good by helping people get out of debt. At least that's what I told myself. But with this new company, I felt no satisfaction whatsoever. At first, I just checked over spec sheets for accuracy. It wasn't even data entry, but quality assurance. But then I was given additional responsibility to communicate necessary changes with the factories. Most of the factories my company worked with happened to be in China, and my interest in that country was beginning to grow. I also gained some appreciation in Chinese, that is, Taiwanese, music through my correspondence with the original five on QQ. Lastly, at this time, I became interested in Korean dramas as well. So, a lot of changes were taking place in my life. In 2011, I started teaching myself Chinese through a book I bought at Borders bookstore. So I spent most of 2011 doing that. My friendships in China began to grow and expand. This brings me to 2012, which was my worst year financially. While I was making decent money, it would take a long time for me to pay off all the debts I incurred while I was unemployed. I wanted to get out of the company I was working for because I was not enjoying my work. Furthermore, my interest in Chinese music led me also to enjoy a certain sorry, Taiwanese drama, Smiling Pasta. In 2012, I shelled out a whopping $600 on a language learning package of Korean. It was the equivalent of 2 years of college level study, though I hadn't really used it. I discussed my work situation with someone of the original five, who suggested I teach English in China. I never had considered teaching as a viable career option until that point, but I was still not sold on China. After some difficulties and an argument I had with my soulmate, I tried to make an agreement with her. I told her that I would move to South Korea to teach English. So why did I want to move to South Korea? Well, at the time, I was becoming more intrigued by that culture. I was listening to their music, watching their television shows, and learning their language. I also wanted to help people, and I thought teaching English would be a possibility. South Korea had one of the highest teen suicide rates in the world, and I thought if I could do my part to help them, I could really make a difference. I've always desired to help people in the world. Well, it was worth a shot. So that was my promise to my soulmate before we separated. Shortly thereafter, as if some higher power heard my intent, I received in my online mailbox an offer to teach English in South Korea. So I applied immediately. I hadn't realized then the red tape I would have to wade through to acquire the position. The first problem was my college degree. I hadn't realized at that time I had never actually received my college degree. Mind you, I graduated about 10 years prior, but I disliked my college so much I never inquired about it. Now, I had no choice. It was a small error. A minor briefly considered was never dropped. This was quickly corrected, but cost precious time. By the time I had all the paperwork in order, the offer was rescinded. I decided not to reapply for work in South Korea because of the tremendous effort I needed, and thought I would be better off either in Japan or China. Well, after the 2011 tsunami and subsequent nuclear disaster in Japan, as well as my loss of interest, I decided not to pursue that choice. However, my interest in China was burgeoning, so I decided to apply to that country. Interestingly, another email came floating down to me offering a position in that country, so I applied. That was at the end of 2013, after studying Korean for 2 years. I had all but forgotten the Chinese I learned 2 years earlier. Actually, my friendships were becoming strained at that time with the original five, now down to just three. Because I was working all day, I seldom had time to talk with them. Also, I think China was moving away from QQ at about that time, focusing on their new social media, WeChat. Anyway, I was accepted to the program to teach, and I had to make a choice of where. I had very little knowledge of Chinese geography back then. I knew I didn't want to work in a big city, though. That left me with three options: Chengdu, Kunming, and Xiamen, perhaps the only other cities I knew in China. My relationship with a girl in Chengdu I felt was the best, so I chose that city. However, not long after I applied, that girl got married and moved to Guangzhou. We barely spoke after that, but it did not deter me. I got all my requirements and by 2014 was ready to move. So, for 2 topsy-turvy years, I lived in Chengdu. It was okay, but I needed to find a new place, so I moved to Beijing. That didn't last long. I actually ended up with 4 employment offers: Beijing, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Japan. This time, I chose Japan because of my angel, Yui, who I had met in Chengdu. So actually, my reason to move to Japan was entirely due to China. However, that was not as fruitful as I had hoped. When I lost my job in Japan, it was China that came to my rescue. And for that, I am grateful. And there you have it, my reason for moving to China. A promise made to my soulmate. A bunch of people I eventually lost contact with, save only one of the original 5. A lost opportunity in South Korea, and 2 years of language learning, which is why my Chinese never really developed. At that point, I didn't have any more money to invest in Chinese language learning. Though I do not regret it. Everything taken together feels kind of like a Rube Goldberg machine leading me here. Take it as you will. I hope you enjoyed this short history. If so, drop a like and subscribe. And support my Patreon. Link in the description. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Catch us next time.